Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Sunday Reading Reflections. I am Brendan McAllister, and I am the youth minister at St. John the Evangelist Catholic Church. And we will be looking this week primarily at the Gospel. And this is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 9, verses 30 to 37. And here we see Jesus and his disciples. So this is a little bit after what we looked at last week, where Peter was declared Jesus as the Christ, as the Messiah, and Jesus is telling us to pick up our own crosses. So this is a little bit after that, and they're on their way to Capernaum, and Jesus is reminding them again. He's saying, the Son of Man is to be betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And 3 days after being killed, he will rise again. But the disciples didn't quite understand what he was saying, and they were a little too afraid to ask, so they kind of just let that go. Because if they had asked, or they had maybe thought a little bit more about it, perhaps they wouldn't have been in despair come Good Friday, when they would have known. Here's Jesus basically telling them exactly what's going to happen, and yet when we know on Good Friday that they all run away. So Jesus is telling them exactly what's about to happen, and they're too confused, and they're not really asking, which really points out to when we don't understand when we don't understand, especially about the faith, it's always good to ask someone who either knows the answers or might know where to find the answers. I know I don't always know where I can find the answers. Sometimes I'll ask Father Francisco, or I know a bunch of people who know more about theology or the faith than I do, so I'll consult with them as well. So it's always good, whether it be talking to your teacher, myself, perhaps your parents, or even Father Francisco about questions. And this is good reminder there, where if the disciples had asked Jesus, what do you mean? Jesus could have explained, and maybe they would have been a bit more prepared for what was happening on Good Friday and on Easter. They wouldn't have been as confused and maybe not as scared, but they choose not to ask him. But instead they just decide to do something else. And this is what happens. So when they get to Capernaum and they get to the house that they were going to, Jesus asked them what they were arguing about. And again, they didn't want to say anything because they were arguing about who was the greatest among them. But Jesus knows exactly what they were arguing about, and he gives them a warning. And he says, whoever wants to be first must be the last of all and servant of all. So basically, what Jesus is saying here is, you can't make yourself better than everyone else. That's not how you become first. He's essentially saying, be like him. Jesus came to serve. Jesus served his disciples. He served the people in Israel, and he really set that example for each and every one of us. So it's really a call to be humble. We are called to be servants of all we come around. That doesn't necessarily mean we let other people walk over us and use us, but what it does mean is that we are willing to serve others out of love, just like Jesus did. Jesus served us out of love. And this connects back to last week's reading with James, where James talks about our faith being shown in our works. So when we are the servant of others, that's our works showing our faith. And this is just another beautiful example here of Jesus calling us to be humble. One of the titles that is sometimes used by popes is servant of the servants of God. And this is essentially a way that the Pope is able to remind himself that he's first our servant. So he's the servant of the servants of God. So we're the servants of God, and the Pope is our servant. And it's an idea there where it's humbling to remind the Pope where his role is. He's the shepherd of the church, and he should be serving the church. And I think that's a good way to like think about our lives. How are we serving others in our lives? How can we humble ourselves to be those servants of other people? And finally, Jesus takes a little child and says, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." So, considering a lot of people who might be watching this are either youth or parishioners, for the youth, welcome your friends, welcome other classmates, or even if you have programs at the school where you're able to welcome the younger youth. So I know when I was in elementary school, we had this thing called reading buddies, where we paired up with students who were younger and read books with them. And initially, I went in there and I wasn't necessarily all too big of a fan of it. I'm like, why am I reading this younger student? And my teacher sort of took me aside and said, well, you know what? This is a way we can serve the students. This is a way we can show that we care. And when I started thinking about that way, I started to enjoy it a lot more. I didn't try to like get the younger student to pick a book I wanted to read. I said, hey, what book do you want me to read you? And that was one of the ways that I learned to be serving others when I was quite young. So I don't know, especially with the current state of things, I don't think that sort of stuff is happening. But when it does, be willing to do that for other students, younger students. And for any adults who are listening, I know sometimes it can be challenging to want to welcome younger people, and I know it kind of sounds crazy. Sometimes even me as a youth minister, um, especially outside of work, it can be a bit challenging at times, just because I want to be quiet. But sometimes it's just taking that time to listen to a younger person, and I know for me from having experienced with this before, especially when I'm out at the mall or other places and I run into a youth from ministry or one of the schools and they recognize me, it even though sometimes I want to just be quiet, be by myself, I make that challenge to myself to go say hello, to talk to the kids, see how they are doing, and almost every single time just smiles and just like being essentially being heard. So challenge adults to do that. Like if you recognize youth, or even at church, like listening to them as well. Because ultimately, when we welcome people who are younger than us, we're ultimately welcoming Christ. So whether or not we're in elementary school, high school, or adulthood, it's always someone else who's younger than us. But also the other thing too that we look at it too, we can also look at this as people who are not part of the faith, people who are essentially kind of like children in a sense coming into the faith when they're brand new to the faith, being able to welcome those, whether they be friends or parishioners, whoever else, welcoming them in and sort of like walking with them in the same way that Jesus walked with us every day. And just reminding them really what Jesus' love for us is. So, this is sort of what I've been looking at today with the gospel, where Jesus just challenges in many different ways. He reminds his disciples that Good Friday is coming up. He is going to die, but he's going to rise again. So, instead of being like disciples and not asking questions when we don't understand something, be willing to ask. Ask someone who you know is going to be able to help you find the answers. Also, remember to be a servant of other people, to be humbling ourselves so that we can serve Christ. And children are a huge aspect of the faith. Welcoming the young ones, whether it be young in age or young in faith, and walking with them and listening to them and leading them to Christ. And in some ways, many ways, they might lead us closer to Christ. I know whenever I go to an RCIA class to help out with something, haven't really done that here at St. John's, but in past when I've done that, I've heard so many insights that I would never have thought of. People who are just coming into the faith, and that's a beautiful opportunity there as well. So That's a lot of stuff, and I hope that something sticks out to you about how Jesus is calling us to be servants of other people, to be able to serve others as he has served us and love others as we have been loved by him. So until next week, I want to wish you a very happy week and God bless. I am praying for you. Please pray for me. Bye.